Welcome to Entry Point Faith. Join us each week to discover fresh meaning in the world and find faith your way. Now, here is Pastor Nancy Lafferty.
I am Nancy Lafferty. Welcome back. I have the pleasure to sit and talk with Beth Thorp today. Beth has gone through a journey that is phenomenally tragic, but also hope-filled. She and her husband have endured something that no parent wants to, but I'm interested in hearing from Beth, not in telling you myself. So Beth, welcome today. We are so glad that you have joined us, and I know that it's unbelievably tough, but I want to go ahead and start with the difficulty and the tragedy that you have suffered, and I want to say how sorry I am that you lost your son. So please tell us a little bit about your son, Mitchell.
Oh, thank you. First of all, Nancy, for having me on the show. I'm honored to speak with you and your listeners. Yes, it was a very long, hard journey. My beautiful son, Mitchell, was born a healthy child, very vibrant. We hardly ever went to the doctors, really, except for occasional earache and so forth. And it really was at the age of 13, he came home with very severe headaches and just was not himself. And so like any parent, you think, well, maybe he's coming down with something like the flu or some kind of virus. So you give him some pain medicine and monitor that and put him to bed. But as time went on, and then we went to the doctor, and they tell you to follow every step that they tell you to do. But I could tell something was not right, and something was still not correct. And so I have to tell your listeners, to speed the story. I mean, this started at age 13, and eventually the pain became worse, and we were constantly chasing pain. And yet doctors could not figure out or diagnose what was wrong with him until, again, we went into the hospital when things got really worse. And then obviously he's in the hospital, and then they're running tests and MRIs and CAT scans and blood work. And yet things kept coming back negative normal, but he wasn't. And it started to mystify doctors. They were scratching their heads after a while. And then from one doctor, Children's Hospital here locally, they couldn't do any more. They said, you need to take him elsewhere. We can only do so much. And suggested maybe Mayo Clinic, or they suggested a research hospital up here in UCLA, Los Angeles, which I'm in California. So we had that hard decision. Okay, where are we going to take him? So we ended up taking him to the research hospital up in Los Angeles, and he was there for a month. Again, they took his paperwork and did even a further workup of what was going on with him. And now we're fast forwarding months now into years when he was at UCLA, when by that point the pain got so severe, he was in myoclonic seizures due to pain. And yet here you are as a parent, you're frustrated and you're frightened out of your mind for your child. You're doing everything you know to do. You're following all the steps, and you're hoping that the doctors have the answers for you. But it was a rude awakening. They don't always have all the answers. So I know my child and the many people maybe out there in the world have been misdiagnosed, undiagnosed, which my son was undiagnosed to his death, and still mystified of what happened. And even when he's passed finally at a Texas hospital, Baylor, and literally we took him all over the United States looking for answers. So we left no stone unturned, like any parent would, to find a diagnosis, a cure, something. And we did Western medicine, and then we did integrative medicine, and we combined them both. And you're trying to find that balance to see what would help him. But ultimately, he passed at the age of 18, which was, like any parent, is the hardest thing to lose a child before you. And it's one of the deepest pains of grief, because they say the deeper the love, the harder the grief, and it's harder to come out. So grief is a whole nother huge subject matter to talk about if people are losing loved ones and how to care for them and help them through the grief process. But it really was in my deepest pain and grief, curled up in a ball, not wanting to be on the planet anymore, because a part of me felt like I died with my son, right? That God spoke deep within my spirit, because we were both faithful people. We had people praying over us, pastors come to the house, praying over us over the years. And I'm curled up in a ball, and it's like my trust was broken, right? When you're, as human nature, when you are hurt or you're offended, the first place people want to go is to blame God. Why did you do this? Why did you take my son? Why did you take, I never really went there. I kind of went there more in the why, God, why? What is the meaning behind all this? And curled up in a ball, he spoke deep within my spirit, as he does through the Holy Spirit. And he told me clearly, when it illuminated my mind, he said, this is not the end. This is the beginning.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to stop you right there because that is a fantastic statement. Let's back up a little bit and come back to that statement again. I want to ask you about certainly the frustration and the sudden realization that our modern medicine cannot give you an answer to what is wrong with your baby. There is something so unsettling about that, isn't there? Because we trust our experts and we expect our experts to know what's wrong. And I think, we have lauded modern medicine and we have respected our doctors wonderfully. And I know many, many people with many, many stories of not getting these answers. And so I wonder sometimes if our culture sets the medicine man up or the medicine human being up as knowing all things erroneously. Did we grow up believing that and then we find out it's not true? And then what do we do with that feeling? So talk a little bit about how you and your husband talked and processed the incredible nature of the fact that doctors could not give you a diagnosis.
Yes, because we were in and out of many different hospitals. If you could see his medical records, they are like, go on forever. I'd be walking in with this huge book of all his tests, that things were done before. And I understand now, because you go, like you said, you go in trusting they're the experts. I'm not, right? Until they keep coming and they can't figure out what's wrong. And then you start to do your research and trying to figure out for yourself. And then you say, well, have you thought about this? X, Y, Z. Have you looked into this and that and the other? And then you start to begin to, since you're checking off all the dots and checking off all the things all the tests that they ran. And then you're like, well, it's really mimicking this. Have you tested that for that? And so it was a constant with that all the time with all the doctors. And I really began to understand what they mean by practicing medicine. Because when it's a real difficult case, when they can't start figuring it out and things aren't coming, they're showing up. I mean, they brought in the whole neurology team, right? They even brought in a retired neurologist, come in, sit by his bedside. And he was the most, kindest man at that point that I've ran into. And he took one look at my son, Mitchell, and he said, when he was in that hospital, he says, I want to see him clean. Get him off everything. I need a baseline. I need to see what's going on. I said that was the best thing I ever heard, because they were masking everything with drugs to ease his pain. And I said that was the most honest, upfront answer I could hear of someone, take him off everything. And that's always I asked for. What is the root cause? What is driving all this pain in my son? Why can't he hold his head? He got to the ability where he could not walk. He could not speak. He couldn't feed himself. He was losing so much weight so rapidly. They basically, did at the hospital put in a G tube in his stomach because he couldn't begin to swallow. He was losing too much weight alarmingly fast. And we were doing everything in our power to keep him alive so we could figure out what was going on.
Sure. Did you ever experience the feeling that they didn't believe you or they didn't believe him? Did they think you were making it up?
Oh, yes. They came at us with that. When the neurology team could not figure it out, they said, well, it must be all in his head. And that's about you as a parent. You want to go, here my son was a 4.0 student, an amazing athlete. Baseball he lived for and loved. My husband played for the Dodgers organization as a pitcher, so he coached many children in baseball, and my son's photograph is on the front cover of the book. I mean, he'd rather be out doing this. You think he wants to be laying here? He wants to be, and I would show him that. I would show doctors, this is Mitchell. This is how he was. This is not in his head. But you have to allow doctors to do their course of what they're asking you to do. And so they did all their tests. They had to bring, once the neurology team couldn't figure it out, they brought the psychologist in, and he's in so much pain, he can barely respond. By the time they get through all their tests and battery of tests, which you have to allow them to do, then they came back to us and said, well, yeah, it's not in his head. It's pain-driven, but he could be depressed. I'm thinking to myself, you think so? If I'm suffering from all this pain, yeah, I wouldn't be happy either. But anyway, you have to sometimes bite your tongue, and but still, then you're there still scrambling. And after a month in the U Research Hospital, they basically told us we can't do anything else for your son. We've done everything we could. Go home and make him comfortable. Okay, so then we are not still giving up. At that point, we knew we had to take him home and put him in what they call palliative care. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they wouldn't release us from the hospital unless I had things lined up, because they're so scared about being sued nowadays. So I had to line up I said, I have everything lined up, because by that time I was making phone calls, because prior to going to the research hospital, I had a nutritionist, I had an osteopath, I had his physical therapist, his pastor. I had this whole team to be there for him when he came home. And the moment he came home, boy, they got right to work. And my nutritionist and the osteopath were right there. She first looked at she's so funny, she first looked at the canned food that they feed you. And she said, oh my gosh, I wouldn't even give this to my dog. I mean, that's how blunt she was. I'm like, okay. So we started this whole thing of organically juicing all these greens, and she put all kinds of supplements and things to help build his weight, and different things that she changed his remedies based on his blood work of what he was deficient in and what he needed. And then the osteopath worked right by her side, and he started to bring in some stuff from Germany and some things that he would use under his tongue. Because the first thing he said to me, the only one that brought the most sense to his situation, was there's an underlying, first of all, inflammation in his brain, and something is tragically affecting his central nervous system. So those are the first things we're going to try to first get the inflammation down, because something's affecting that. And his central nervous system was beginning to shut down. So they went right to work. And again, very expensive, because now you're bringing doctors in. Some of this is not covered under insurance. But as parents, you'd lose everything to save your child. It didn't matter. And the community heard about our situation here, and all our closest friends, because we have a big faith. That's one thing that people need to know, to have a community around you, like a village. And when they heard about all this we were going through as a family, and Mitchell, they came to us and said, we want to do something. We want to do a walkathon, something to help raise funds, because we left the hospital with great insurance, mind you, with a $100,000 medical bill. That's even with good insurance.
Wow.
On top of everything, to try and pay off. And then to add to the fact, now we're bringing new doctors in, making all home visits, and osteopaths and nutritionists. So they ended up doing a walkathon, raising $70,000 for us to help pay off that hospital bill. And it forever changed us on how gracious people are and want to help. But Mitchell did survive another good 15 months after that. He was starting to gain weight. He started to look better. We started seeing him not grabbing his head so much due to pain. So small little wins, And I had to read his body language. He couldn't still speak. I still couldn't understand why he couldn't speak. He understood, Because when we would talk to him, I'd say, you have to tap, like he's on the bed, tap your fingers if this is working, and I'll know that's yes. And if you don't tap, I know it means no. So he was in there. It was like he was trapped in his body that was failing him. I don't know how else to say that. It's just, it was horrific as a parent to see anyone suffer like that. And as a mommy, right, we're supposed to make things better. And I couldn't make it better. And that was the hardest thing for me personally on my end. And when I came home from that hospital visit, that is when I fell to my knees, wailing like Mother Mary at the cross. I mean, I never wailed so hard. I had to surrender him because I was holding on so tight for my will be done on earth. And it really was God waiting for me to surrender him and myself to him, because there was a higher calling to this day on Mitchell's life. And people have written to me on that. It's written in the book. I got permission to write the letter they wrote to me to use in the book. Very prophetic women who heard the voice of God and what they wrote to me. And sometimes it really helps to have, when you're so close to it, you can't see everything that's going on around you, because it's a very dark season of life. There's chaos, confusion all around you. And you just wanted it to stop, right? And it really was that moment of surrendering the outcome, no matter what it would be. And ultimately, God had to take Mitchell home to heal him, because no one here on this side of the veil of heaven on this planet could figure it out. And so from that point on, when I heard him say, this is not the end, this is the beginning. And literally that same week, my husband was at the local church here locally, where he was coaching two boys that played baseball. One had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, the other lymphoma. Both families trying to make ends meet. God spoke to his spirit saying, you need to form a bridge, form a foundation to help many. That's what came up and resonated in his spirit. And he came home to tell me that, and I'm still going through the grieving process. He says, gosh, Beth, the Lord really spoke to me saying that, we should form a foundation to help many going through what we went through, because there was nothing like this here in my neck of the woods. And then I turned to him, I said, you want to do what? I said, well, we don't know anything about starting a foundation. And then I realized, as I listened to him speak, gave him that time to speak, I said, wow, I wonder if that's what you mean, God, that this is not the end, this is the beginning. And oh my gosh, we got on our hands and knees. We gave it over to the Lord, that he's the CEO of this organization and that he will show us the way. And sure enough, we formed all the paperwork. We started with one child at a time. We've now have helped thousands of children. We're talking now 14 years later for your listeners. We've given back over 3 million and counting back into the community to helping families with children fighting for their tomorrows. And
so this is the Mitchell Thorp Foundation, correct?
yeah.
Established in what year?
Well, Mitchell passed that November of 2008. And it was formed in like that next year, almost close year to the date in 2009.
And you have helped 1,500 families.
And counting.
And counting.
And over 3 million back into the community. And we've grown over the years with the different programs under the foundation that we help families with. Our medical and home assistance program, that's our first program. And that covers anything not under insurance that we can help families with. We help keep families a roof over their head, food on the table, and the lights on. Because like me, I had to quit my job to stay by my child. But those bills keep coming and coming. And that's where the spiral effect happens for a lot of these families, and they get buried. And then our second program is our healing and rehabilitation. And we found that a lot of, like us, therapy, when they leave the hospital, some of these therapies aren't always covered on insurance, or they want to do more therapies that the hospitals just don't give enough, maybe 1 day a week, and they might need 2 or 3 days a week of therapies. We also offer counseling services for the whole family unit. for post-traumatic stress, not only for the child, but for the whole family, as well as sibling support because they get forgotten. And we're happy to say we've kept families that have come to us married and intact, 100% together, not end in divorce or separation, because statistically, around 70% do end in divorce or separation when caring for a critically ill child, because the stress load is so high that someone walks away from it. And then it's hard when we get cases of single moms coming to us, raising kids on their own, and then now they have a medically fragile child. I mean, I have no idea how they do it. But luckily, there's a foundation now. We come alongside these families, let them know they're not alone. We will pray with them. Most of them, I have no idea where their walk or their faith is. But most of the time when we say, can we pray for you and your child? And so we'll go in and we'll change the atmosphere of that room or that hospital room. And we just command the enemy off this situation. We ask the Holy Spirit to fall afresh, not only on the situation, but the child, but also for wisdom for the doctors to understand how to treat. And to give that child a sense of hope and a purpose. And to let them know how many times I've spoken life into some of these children, that this is just a season of life, that you will get through this and you will be well. And if you can speak life into them, then they begin to believe it.
Absolutely. How wonderful for you to develop that foundation and be so supportive of so many families because you know what the toll that it took. How can someone contact this foundation? How can someone find out more about that?
Well, we are definitely online, so they would just have to just go to mitchellthorp.org. That's MITCHELLTHORP as in Paul.org, and they can learn all about what we do. And yeah.
Excellent. You've also written a book, ANEW Creation, Finding Meaning in the Midst of Tragedy. Share with me about the title. I find it interesting that you have anew as one word. Share the desire to write this book and the journey that took.
Oh my goodness. Well, it was always in my heart to write it. I couldn't have written it, 3 years in, 5 years in, because I was still in the midst of it. I was still couldn't see the fingerprints of God through it all. It really took, I wanted it out at our 10-year anniversary, but even that timing wasn't ready. And every time I try to write, it's like I was frozen. And, it's everything in God's perfect timing. So when COVID hit and shut all my events down with the foundation and just quieted my world, and there's something to be said about quieting our world, then we can really begin to hear him speak to us. And he spoke so clearly again. I don't hear him all the time, but when I hear his voice, I can recognize his voice. And he said to me at that time, daughter, it's time to write our story. And it just resonated with me like where did that come from? Oh my gosh. And then once he said that to me, it was like almost something broke free. And I just got to it. It's like when the Father speaks, you got to move. And so I began writing. It was 9 months to write the manuscript. My office was like crazy with all kinds of photos and everything. I had to go back in time, right? And it's written as a beautiful love story, actually. It's a story. And all the ups and downs that we went through, but it's also God living through us. And now that I can look back on it, during those times and applying scripture during those times that we were going through all these different things. And it really was ANEW Creation was, again, after Mitchell's passing, I'll just have to tell your audience, they'll have to get the book to read it because I had to document and photograph everything that was happening because no one would ever believe me. The purposeful signs that he was showing my family, to me, my husband, that we knew were meant specifically for us to see. And that's how God speaks to each one of us. He knows how to get to us. And he will show us things, or someone could speak through a person. But in our case, there was a lot of signs that I photographed And ANEW Creation was one of them when Mitchell couldn't, so desperately wanted to speak to us. He couldn't speak. And he had a walking stick, like a shepherd's staff, that we would always use to when we would hike in Sedona, beautiful Sedona. We'd like to do hiking as family. And I'll just share this little portion with your audience. But his little nephew, Andrew, tied his little Indian beads that said, spelled out Andrew, with Indian feathers, beautiful feathers, all around Mitchell's walking stick. And he said, I'm going to use Mitchell's walking stick. So, because he couldn't use it anymore. And it was that Mitchell passed Thanksgiving week. So it was a really tough week for my whole family, no question. There was many signs that happened that week. Double rainbows in the sky. They're all sitting down for Thanksgiving in Sedona, right? They're all at the dinner table. They hear this loud crash in the other room. They get up, my niece with little Andrew, get up and went to investigate what was going on. They see Mitchell's walking stick on the ground, and no one was in that room, and it was securely placed. And little Andrew, at the time, he noticed a couple of his beads were broken off. And my niece, who's a faithful woman, she says, I think Mitchell's trying to tell us something. Let's see what he's trying to tell us. She picked up the stick, and then when she turned it around and it said ANEW, one word, he knew I would know what that meant. And he was trying so desperately to tell us, Mama, Daddy, I'm ANEW Creation. I'm okay. He knew how much we were hurting. We were also suffering. And it was also very interesting. Another friend of mine that I'd never realized before, she said, Beth, and she just told me this really about in my book signing about 3 months ago. I know it said ANEW Creation, but what's also interesting, what broke off, the DR, doctors. Doctors were broken off. I said, oh my gosh, you interpreted it that way? I never interpreted that. I said, oh, you're right. Doctors couldn't figure it out, and it was broken off. God had to take Mitchell home. Mitchell was trying so desperately to say, Mama, I'm ANEW. I'm okay. And I was suffering so. And then when they picked it up, because half of my family was in Sedona, I was in Tucson with my other family on my way back from Baylor Hospital the week of his passing, where other miracles and signs happened there. And she says, I'm going to take this walking stick. We're going to present it to Beth and Brad. They are just going to be blown away. What just happened here? And so that's why it was named ANEW Creation.
What a wonderful example of interpreting God speaking to you, and also, of course, interpreting Mitchell speaking to you. I find it really interesting that the DR dropped off. And perhaps that was because the doctors failed you. I'm not exactly sure. So hypothetically, what if someone were to come to you, and perhaps someone has, and say, well, I don't hear from God. I don't see God's hand in my life. I am going through a very, very difficult time, and you're telling me that God is going to be with me as I walk through this tragedy. How do you know that? How can I believe that? What would you say to that person?
When I came out of I have to tell your audience, when Mitchell passed, it took 2 years to come out of it, to truly heal. And I often tell people, because I was moving into what we call complicated grief, and I couldn't get out, and I needed help. So it is okay to ask for help. So please ask for help. Find someone you trust that you can bare your soul to. And I, in that case, did. We had some very prophetic, we chose to go with our spiritual counselor, who's a very prophetic woman who took my husband and I through this whole exercise of first forgiveness and forgiving. For example, you can't move forward if you can't forgive. I'll just say that.
That is absolutely true. Say that again.
You cannot move forward unless you begin to forgive and find a way to do that. So she first worked on my husband and then on me. And you had to go through this whole exercise of forgiving each other as a husband and wife, of saying things to each other that we said that were hurtful. Parents and family members that said things that were hurtful. Forgiving doctors that couldn't find the answers. There was so much that was inside of us that needed to be broken off. And it was quite an ordeal. By the end of that session, one, my husband was a bawling mess on the floor. Men have a hard time to express their feelings, but when the Holy Spirit hits, you cannot contain it because he knows right where that hurt is, and he doesn't want you to carry that. So I tell your audience, don't carry it. Let it go. Some people feel that they have to hang on to this bitterness and angerness because that keeps them closer to their loved one. But no, that's not how your loved one wants you to go on. They don't. You know, the fruit of the Spirit includes joy. And I'm normally a very joyful, happy person, very that way. But I wasn't, when the hurts of life come in, and they do come in because we live in a very fallen world, as we all know. There is so much negativity that abounds and painful things that happen that we have to take control of our thoughts, of where we're thinking and what we're occupying our thoughts with. And we have to kind of make some real life changes. And you have that choice to do so.
Excellent. That's an excellent response. And it's one completely filled with hope and reality. So I thank you for that honest answer. Share with us, before we go, share with us one of your, not necessarily favorite, but one of the families that your foundation has helped. Share with us a little bit about what you were able to do in the life of one of your families.
Wow. Well, I will say I'll go early on. Let's say we're in our third year running the foundation, okay? And so we're just building it and we're growing one child at a time. This one family came to us. Their precious child was born with a lot of abnormalities and could not hear. And other facial abnormalities. She was not a child, a candidate for a cochlear implant. She was a candidate for a brain stem implant. They did not do them here in the United States at that time with children 12 and under. But the family, think about it as a parent, you have to get the child early on for them to start somewhat hearing sounds, for them to start to read, to speak in some way. So as parents, right, we go to the ends of the earth to figure it out. They heard about our foundation. They came to us and said, well, we found this doctor. He's very well known in Europe. Actually, he's in Italy, who has performed brainstem implants on children throughout the world. They don't do it here in the United States. And we want to take our child there to have this procedure done. Now it will be, and they were sharing with us, it's going to be about, and this was out insurance in a different country, about $65,000, $70,000, plus our stay there and everything. And so I wasn't moved, I wasn't shaken, because I knew what the community did for us to raise about that much money. And then first and foremost, I said to them, well, first of all, how big is your network? Because this is going to take not only a village, maybe even a country, to start raising this kind of money, but we can do it. And I explained what happened to us. And so it just happened to be coming up on our walkathon. So we carry the walkathon forward now, that when they first came out for us, now 14 years later, we do it every year. And to make a long story short, the family raised close to $65,000. So it got the child over there. And there was like other doctors throughout the world watching these procedures, and they had children lined up to have, it was just not her. There were other children within that week or two having these operations, and they were watching other doctors flown in. 2 doctors out of LA flew in because they were going to treat her when she came back. So I'll make a long story short, she came back. The LA doctors were following her. And to make a long story short, it is now approved here in the United States for children 12 and under.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That is a fantastic story.
That is. So that was, like I said, parents, we go to the ends of the earth to figure it out. And most parents usually do. Some of them have even found cures.
So, I'm looking at your face, and your face is truly filled with joy. You are a woman of faith. You have gone through one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult experience a parent can go through. yet you are smiling and you are helping other people. You did not remain curled up in a ball in the corner. You didn't quit on life. You didn't turn your back on God. You didn't turn your back on your husband. You decided to believe what God said. It is not over. And you are, with your husband, making a phenomenal difference in this world. I am so inspired by your words, by your story. I am going to get your book, and I certainly encourage our listeners today to check out mitchellthorp.org. Is that correct?
Yes, mitchellthorp.org. They can find it there.
Okay.
And if they want to get the book, it's wherever books are sold, online or at Barnes & Nobles. And usually if you buy them on Amazon, it's there. Or they can go to anewcreation.org. That's my website, and I can sign a copy for you and mail it to you. I'll put a personal message. But anyway, each way they prefer. And I would really love, as authors, we love reviews. So they can write a review on my website or on Amazon after you read it, how it's touched your spirit, how it moved you, because that's how the book will take you through that journey, and it will move you, and it will start to transform you, and it'll start to give you encouragement and hope and strength and power and what it means to be an overcomer. And I read a whole chapter on that. So,
well, thank you, Beth. It is truly, you are a remarkable human being, and I thank you for giving us your time today. And I look forward to reading your book, and I hope that the audience will also do that. So thanks, Beth, and best wishes as you continue making this world so much more beautiful with the hope that you are giving. I will be praying for you and your husband, Brad, as you continue your foundation and continue to not be curled up in a ball in the corner and show the rest of us how to get through tragedy. So I thank you for your time with us today. Audience, I will see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thanks for listening in on this week's discussion on Entry Point Faith. You can join the Entry Point Faith community in person every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. at Conner Prairie in Fishers, Indiana. For more information and a transcript of Nancy's messages, visit entrypointonline.org. Entry Point Faith is brought to you in partnership with mypodcast.media.